Representative Higley, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I had a good reception down at Ed Committee. And again, for the record, Mark Higley, I think it's important to tell you the towns that I represent. It's a 2-seat district now. So there's 8 towns: Lowell, J. Westfield, Troy, Eden, Irisburg, Coventry, and Newport Town. And that has a lot to do with why I presented the amendment. I think you might have heard, if you heard my floor spiel yesterday, my concerns around this initial $32 million coming out of the Ed Fund for a testing and remediation of all schools in the state of Vermont. And then it was an 80-20 split. And then, of course, the bill proposes a stay of the program with the current ones. And I heard on the floor it was 5 current schools that are requiring remediation. And on the news last night, I heard it was 10. So somewhere between 5 and 10. I'm not sure just what that number is. We don't really know what that amount is yet for remediation of those 5 to 10 schools. And so when I saw this particular amount in here for Burlington School alone, I had a real concern with it. So what my amendment does is it basically removes that section in section 2, the big C number, the big C, and it would put that money back up in for all the rest of it. And I think Ledge Council had said during our education committee presentation that that money would go back into A, which is because there hasn't been any money distributed yet for that. Another concern I had in talking with the Ed Committee was I think we're setting up quite a precedent here for going forward if and when this task force comes forward with its recommendations. Initially, this program was an 80-20. Now it's 100% for these current ones that are doing it. I think it would be very hard to step back and ask again for an 80-20 split. The other thing, there was a study done actually, and I hope they look at that information. It was an ad hoc group from the Superintendent's Association back in 2019. And I'm sure some of you remember this. It was over $500 million at that time of pending construction projects. And even in their study, they had talked about an equity issue with schools that can afford to bond and schools that can't afford to bond. And there again lies my real issue with Burlington and all my schools that have actually paid into this money that is now going 100% towards this Burlington remediation. And just one other thing that I found out a little interesting, again, another equity issue in my mind. Currently, the estimate from Burlington School is just that. And going forward, everybody else is going to have to follow standards set by the Secretary of Education and Agency of Natural Resources on specific guidelines as to what will and won't be covered in a remediation process.
Representative Higley, I appreciate you bringing this amendment forward. We have had a lot of conversations over the last couple of years here about school construction and PCBs, and I think I drove the commissioners of A&R and Secretary of AOE fairly wild this last 6 months because I kept on asking them to coordinate these two conversations. And over, they very kindly told me they weren't able to because the way we had structured statute. And I'm very pleased with the Education Committee's work to actually do what needs to be done in order to coordinate these conversations for all of the equity concerns that you actually raised. Because we want to make sure that all the schools in the kingdom that have, sewage running through them are going to have their construction funds and needs met, given how hard it is to bond in certain communities. So I think we agree with your intent here. I just think that we've already sort of voted and debated the issue of Burlington given state action. Does anyone have any questions for Representative Higley? We're going to hear from Representative Brady about the Education Committee's conversation.
No, again, it's just an optics issue for me in particular. Again, when my constituency sees that Burlington's getting 16 million, the program's on hold, we've already paid into the money, that's a concern.
I hear that. My committee has PCB findings too.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Representative Brady? Mind.
Okay. Maybe I'll start backwards. I know we've already talked about the bill, but given that we're having the discussion about one school, I think it's important to remember why we have this whole bill in two parts that very, very much need to go together, because we can't afford as a state financially or for the well-being of students and families to do facilities work and health and safety work in separate programs on separate timelines, as is currently happening. As the chair said, we have schools that are one flush away from closing. We have schools that have lots of space. We have schools that are now putting up trailers because they're bursting at the seams. We have schools that are already having to make adjustments because of the PCB testing that has started. Cabot is a really stark example of that. And so all the planning and decisions around facilities statewide needs to be done together in one program on one timeline. This task force is set up very deliberately in order to do that with expertise on health and safety and financing and instruction and sort of all facets that would go into school construction funds. In terms of then what we do, because we already set aside 32 million and we've already started this program, that again, our education committee is recommending that we need to pause so that these two things, PCBs and everything else about school facilities, come together under one umbrella. But we already have 32 million set aside, and we already have some schools that have already tested, and we already have one school that has certainly experienced a lot of disruption. The principle of equity is that we give everybody access, maybe different access in order to get to a common thing. So this super easy example, the graphic is out there, a lot of step stools. My husband's 6'6", he's not going to need the same step stool I might need to reach some of the cabinets in our kitchen. Equality would be if we got the same step stool. But equity is getting what we need to access the same thing. And in this case, the thing is education for our students and our students being in school. And in the case of Burlington, the real history, not hypothetical, they might test in the future, but the real history is that those students, went out of in-person learning 9 months before the pandemic closed down the rest of those states. Those students and families have been severely disrupted and put under strain, to put it lightly, longer than any other students in the state. And so we are trying to take into account the moment we're in, which is Burlington has happened, some are starting, and there's an infinite number of ways things could happen in the future. So how can we pause where we are and move forward in a coherent way, acknowledging what's already happened?
And is your committee's assumption, when you had that conversation about Representative Higley's amendment, that the future task force that's being set up that will create guidelines around these things is going to be looking to fund construction needs and remediation for schools throughout the state that might not have been able to look at these issues yet?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we are hoping and intending is, as we all heard from, the Rhode Island example, not that we have to copy that, but what we're not necessarily just reinstating a state aid percentage program, but we're maybe designing a more thoughtful program that is run perhaps through the treasurer and the Agency of Education in conjunction, and has strategic priorities, and certainly health and safety are likely to be, near top of that around how we do financing statewide. Nothing would preclude local schools from, making their own facilities plans or bonding for that. But in terms of our statewide investment, which we've done none of since 2007, it's a coherent statewide plan, and it's all things about facilities happening at the same time, not in isolation, because it will be far more expensive if we just continue doing PCBs in isolation.
And my hope is that that task force, and we'll have lots of conversations about the task force going into the future, it takes into account communities' ability to bond or not, because that is deeply inequitable part of our current structure. So anyone, what was the committee's vote?
The straw poll was 8-1.
Okay. Anyone have any other questions of any kind?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we find the Higley amendment unfavorable. While I appreciate As you said, the numbers, sentiments around equity issues and the bonding issues, I have to share those also, but I think we need to move forward with this bill.
Do we have a second?
Sure.
Okay. Representative Demrow moved that we find the amendment unfavorable. Representative Maslin seconded. Any further discussion? Yeah.
I'm going to vote for the motion as presented. One thing that caught my ear, though, was just because Burlington's out at front, it would be unfair, as my friend from Lowell said, if the standards that were applicable to Burlington were not replicated or vice versa, that the schools for eligibility and standards and whatnot were not evenly applied across the universe.
Agreed. And I believe Representative Sims said that quite clearly when we were discussing the original
I
bill.
thought I remembered, I just worth saying. Thank you.
I would like to reiterate that I think I appreciate the challenge that the Burlington school students have gone through and how important it is to help address those challenges by providing access to resources. And I expect that we will continue to be able to meet all of our community's needs in a similar way, because it is essential that all kids have access to the therapies that they need. And that even though we're spending $16 million now, that will not deplete our ability to be there for our other communities. So I'm voting on the assumption this is a commitment to all communities.
Any further discussion?
Back to Ed, because we have our amendment.
Thank you.
Please call the roll. Thank you.
And we're voting on it being
Unfavorable.
I just want to be
Yes.
clear. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So a yes vote is a no to the amendment.
Thank you.
Yes.
Andrews, yes. Anthony,
Yes.
Beck,
Yes.
Brannigan,
No.
Demrow,
Yes.
Maslin,
Yep.
Mattos,
No.
Odie. I'm sorry, she's not here. Sims,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Canfield,
No.
Kornheiser.
Yes.
So let's see, there's 11 of us.
831.
831.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Representative Higley.
Yes, I do.
That's why I work with words.